Sarah Martinez had always believed that Millbrook was the kind of town where nothing interesting ever happened. The most exciting event in recent memory was when old Mrs. Henderson's cat got stuck in the water tower, and even that had been solved with a simple ladder and some patience. So when the stranger walked into her diner on that rainy Tuesday morning in October, Sarah noticed him immediately. He was tall and thin, with graying hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it. His clothes were expensive but wrinkled as if he'd slept in them. What struck Sarah most were his eyes. They seemed to take in everything at once, darting from the faded photographs on the walls to the regulars sitting at their usual spots, then finally settling on her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Coffee?" Sarah asked, wiping her hands on her apron as she approached his table by the window. "Please." His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "And whatever you recommend for breakfast." Sarah poured his coffee and studied him carefully. "Passing through town?" The stranger wrapped his hands around the mug and stared out the window at Main Street. "You could say that." He paused, then looked directly at her. "You're Sarah Martinez. You've owned this place for 8 years. Your husband died in a car accident 3 years ago, and you have a teenage daughter named Emma who's on the high school track team." Sarah's blood ran cold. She set the coffee pot down with a shaky hand. "How do you know that?" "I know a lot of things about this town, Sarah, more than I wish I did." The stranger's eyes were sad now, almost apologetic. "I know that Tom Bradley, who sits right over there every morning, has been stealing money from the church collection for 6 months. I know that Principal Watson at the high school has been accepting bribes to change grades for certain students. And I know that your sheriff, Mike Coleman, isn't really investigating the break-ins at the jewelry store because he's the one committing them." Sarah glanced around the diner, grateful that the morning rush had ended and only a few customers remained, none close enough to overhear. "That's impossible. Mike Coleman is an honest man? A pillar of the community?" The stranger shook his head. "Sarah, sometimes the people we trust most are the ones hiding the darkest secrets." Before Sarah could respond, the bell above the door chimed, and Sheriff Coleman himself walked in. He was a large man with a friendly face and a mustache that had gone completely gray in the past year. Everyone in town liked Mike. He'd grown up here, married his high school sweetheart, and had been keeping Millbrook safe for over 2 decades. "Morning." "Sarah?" Mike called out, hanging his hat on the rack by the door. "The usual, please." Sarah looked back at the stranger, but he had turned his attention to his coffee, acting as if he'd never spoken. She walked to the counter on unsteady legs, her mind racing. The things he'd said were so specific, so detailed, but they were also impossible. Tom Bradley was one of the kindest men she knew. Principal Watson had been at the high school for 30 years without a single scandal. And Mike Coleman? The idea of Mike stealing anything was absurd. "Everything all right, Sarah?" Mike asked, settling onto his usual stool at the counter. "You look a little pale." "I'm fine," Sarah managed, pouring his coffee. But her eyes kept drifting to the stranger by the window. Mike followed her gaze. "Don't recognize him." "New in town?" "I think so." Sarah's voice was barely audible. After Mike had eaten his breakfast and left, promising to stop by later to check on her like he did every few days since her husband's death, Sarah approached the stranger's table again. He was still nursing his first cup of coffee, the breakfast she'd brought him sitting untouched. "Who are you?" she asked quietly. "My name is David Chen. I used to work for the government, investigations, background checks, that sort of thing. I'm retired now, but old habits die hard. I notice things. I remember things. And sometimes I know things I wish I didn't. Why are you telling me this?" David looked up at her with those intense eyes. "Because this town is sitting on a powder keg, Sarah. The secrets I know, they're all connected. And soon someone is going to light the fuse." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Connected how?" "The church money that Tom Bradley has been stealing? He's been using it to pay off gambling debts, big ones, to some very dangerous people who've been getting impatient. Principal Watson's grade-changing scheme? It's not just about helping struggling students. He's been taking money from parents who want their kids to get into better colleges. And Sheriff Coleman's jewelry store thefts? He's not keeping the money or the jewelry. He's been fencing everything and sending the cash to someone else." "Even if any of that were true," Sarah said, "how could you possibly know all of this?" David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila folder. He set it on the table between them. "Because I've been investigating this town for 6 months, Sarah. And what I found is bigger than just a few corrupt officials. Sarah stared at the folder, afraid to touch it. What do you mean? Someone hired me to look into Millbrook. They suspected that something was wrong here, but they didn't know what. The more I dug, the more I realized that your quiet little town is being used as a front for something much larger. Money laundering, most likely. All three men, Bradley, Watson, and Coleman, they're not working independently. They're working for someone else. Someone who needs clean money moved through legitimate channels. The diner suddenly felt too small, too warm. Sarah sat down across from David, her legs no longer able to support her weight. That's impossible, is it? Think about it, Sarah. Millbrook is perfect for this kind of operation. It's small enough that 3 key people can control most of the money flow, but large enough to move significant amounts without drawing attention. The church handles cash donations. The school processes payments and receives grants. The sheriff's department has access to evidence lockers and confiscated property. It's brilliant, really. Sarah's mind was spinning. But who would hire you to investigate? Who would even suspect something like this? David's expression darkened. That's where things get complicated. The person who hired me is dead, Sarah. Murdered 2 weeks ago, about 50 miles from here, and I think whoever killed him knows that I'm here. The coffee mug slipped from Sarah's hands and shattered on the floor. The few remaining customers looked over, but she barely noticed. What are you saying? I'm saying that by tomorrow morning, everyone in town is going to know that I'm here. And when they do, the people running this operation are going to want me gone. Permanently. David stood up and left a $20 bill on the table. Sarah, I need you to think very carefully about what I've told you. And I need you to be careful who you trust. Because if I'm right about what's happening in Millbrook, then the next few days are going to change everything. He walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back. One more thing. If something happens to me, if I disappear, or if there's an accident, I want you to know that I've left copies of everything I've found somewhere safe. The truth will come out eventually. The only question is whether it comes out before or after more people get hurt. And with that, David Chen walked out into the rain, leaving Sarah alone with a shattered coffee mug, a $20 bill, and the terrifying realization that everything she thought she knew about her hometown might be a lie. Sarah couldn't concentrate on anything for the rest of the day. She burned a batch of her famous chocolate chip cookies, forgot to charge Mrs. Peterson for her lunch, and dropped 3 more plates before finally deciding to close the diner an hour early. Her hands were still shaking as she locked the front door and flipped the sign to closed. The walk home through Millbrook's quiet streets felt different now. Every familiar sight, the old courthouse with its peeling paint, the church where she'd been married 15 years ago, the high school where her daughter Emma spent her days, seemed somehow threatening. Sarah found herself looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows, wondering if David Chen was watching her from somewhere. Emma was already home from track practice when Sarah walked through the front door of their small house on Elm Street. The 16-year-old was sprawled on the couch, homework spread across the coffee table, earbuds in her ears. "Mom, you're early," Emma said, pulling out one earbud and looking up with concern. "Everything okay?" Sarah forced a smile. "Just a slow day at the diner." She sat down next to her daughter, studying Emma's face. Had she always been this young, this innocent? The thought of danger touching her made Sarah's chest tight with anxiety. "There was a weird guy at school today," Emma said, returning to her math homework. "Some stranger asking questions about families in town, who's been here longest, stuff like that." Principal Watson looked really nervous about it. Sarah's blood turned to ice. "What kind of questions?" Emma shrugged. "I don't know exactly. I just heard some teachers talking about it. They said he claimed to be doing some kind of research project about small towns, but nobody believed him." David Chen. It had to be. Sarah realized he hadn't just been sitting in her diner all morning. He'd been making rounds, asking questions, gathering information. "Did anyone get his name?" "I think someone said it was Chen or something like that." Emma looked up from her homework. "Mom, you look really pale. Are you sure you're okay?" Before Sarah could answer, there was a knock at the front door. Both women froze. It was almost 7 o'clock, too late for casual visitors, and everyone in Millbrook knew that people didn't just drop by unannounced after dark. Sarah walked to the door cautiously and peered through the peephole. Sheriff Coleman stood on her porch, his uniform hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable. "Mike," Sarah opened the door, trying to keep her voice steady. "What brings you by?" "Sorry to bother you this late, Sarah. I was hoping we could have a quick chat." Mike glanced past her toward Emma. "Maybe outside?" It's official business. Sarah's heart was pounding, but she stepped onto the porch and pulled the door closed behind her. Mike Coleman had been her husband's best friend, had given the eulogy at his funeral, had helped her fix her leaky roof last spring. But now, looking at his familiar face in the porch light, all she could think about were David Chen's words. "There was a stranger in town today," Mike said, his voice carefully neutral. "Fellow named David Chen. I understand he spent some time at your diner this morning." "He had breakfast there, yes." Sarah kept her voice steady. "Is there a problem?" "Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out." Mike shifted his weight from foot to foot. This Chen character was asking a lot of questions around town today. Questions about specific people, specific businesses. Made some folks pretty uncomfortable. Sarah waited, not trusting herself to speak. "Thing is, Sarah, when I ran his name through our system, some interesting things came up. Turns out Mr. Chen has a history of making false accusations against law enforcement. There's a pattern of him showing up in small towns, spreading rumors, causing trouble." "What kind of accusations?" Mike's eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh, the usual stuff. Corruption, conspiracy theories, that sort of thing. Sometimes he even claims people are in danger, tries to scare honest citizens." He paused. "I'm wondering if he said anything like that to you." Sarah felt trapped. Every instinct told her that Mike Coleman was still the good man she'd known for years, that David Chen was just a troubled stranger stirring up problems. But something in Mike's tone, something in the way he was watching her face made her cautious. "He seemed like a quiet person," she said carefully. "Didn't say much?" "That's good to hear." Mike's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Because I'd hate for you to get caught up in whatever game he's playing. You've been through enough these past few years." After Mike left, Sarah went back inside and found Emma watching her with worried eyes. "Mom, what was that about?" "Nothing important, sweetie. Just some questions about a customer at the diner." But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that it was everything important, and that her quiet life in Millbrook was about to be turned upside down. That night, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the old house made her jump. Around midnight, she got up and checked the locks on all the doors and windows, something she hadn't done since the weeks following her husband's death. She found herself thinking about the manila folder David Chen had shown her. What was in it? What evidence did he have? And more importantly, where was he now? Her questions were answered the next morning when she arrived at the diner to find Tom Bradley and Principal Watson waiting for her in the parking lot. Both men looked haggard as if they hadn't slept. "Sarah," Tom said as she approached with her keys, "we need to talk." Inside the diner, the three of them sat at the same table where David Chen had delivered his bombshell revelations 24 hours earlier. Sarah poured coffee with shaking hands while Tom and Principal Watson exchanged nervous glances. "Mike Coleman called us both last night," Principal Watson began. "He told us about this Chen fellow, about the questions he's been asking." "The thing is, Sarah," Tom added, "this guy didn't just ask general questions. He knew specific things, private things, things that nobody should know." Sarah set down the coffee pot. "What kind of things?" Tom's face was flushed with embarrassment. "He knew about my gambling problem. He knew about the money I borrowed from the church fund. But Sarah, I was going to pay it back. I still am. It was just a temporary thing." Principal Watson nodded miserably. He knew about the grade changes, too. "But it's not what you might think. These were special cases, kids from difficult situations who needed a break. I was trying to help them, and the money from parents?" Sarah asked quietly. Watson's shoulders sagged. "That was just to cover the administrative costs. The paperwork, the time involved. It wasn't really about the money." Sarah studied both men's faces. They were scared, that much was obvious. But were they scared because they'd been caught in criminal activity? Or because a stranger was spreading lies about them? "Where is David Chen now?" she asked. Tom and Watson looked at each other again. "That's the thing," Tom said. "Nobody knows. He checked into the Millbrook Inn yesterday morning, but when Mike went to talk to him last night, he was gone. Just disappeared. Left all his stuff behind. Mike thinks he might have gotten spooked and left town," Watson added, "but his car is still at the inn. His wallet was still in his room. It's like he just vanished." Sarah felt cold dread settling in her stomach. "When was the last time anyone saw him?" "Around 6 o'clock yesterday evening," Tom said. "Mrs. Harper at the general store said he bought some supplies, flashlight, rope, that sort of thing." Said he was going for a walk in the woods behind the old mill. The old mill. Sarah knew the area. It was isolated, surrounded by dense forest with a steep ravine that had claimed more than one life over the years. People went missing in those woods sometimes. Usually they were found eventually, but not always. Has anyone looked for him? She asked. Mike's organizing a search party this morning, Watson said. He asked us to help spread the word. Get volunteers. As Tom and Principal Watson left to rally searchers, Sarah stood alone in her empty diner, David Chen's words echoing in her mind. If something happens to me, if I disappear or if there's an accident. She walked to the window and stared out at Main Street, watching Sheriff Coleman's patrol car cruise slowly past. Mike waved at her through the window, that same friendly smile on his face. But for the first time in her life, Sarah Martinez was afraid of a man she'd known and trusted for 20 years. The search party gathered at dawn outside the Millbrook Inn. Sarah had never seen so many people assembled in one place in her small town, nearly 50 volunteers, including everyone from the high school football coach to elderly Mrs. Henderson, who claimed her arthritis wouldn't slow her down when it came to finding a missing person. Sheriff Coleman stood on the inn's front steps, dividing people into groups and assigning search areas. He looked every inch the competent law enforcement officer, his voice calm and authoritative as he explained the search grid and safety protocols. Remember, folks, we're looking for David Chen, approximately 6 feet tall, gray hair, last seen wearing a dark blue jacket and jeans. He may be injured and unable to call for help, so listen carefully for any sounds. Mike paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. And please stay with your assigned partner. Those woods can be dangerous. Sarah found herself paired with Jenny Morrison, the town librarian, to search the area near Miller's Creek. As they walked toward their assigned section, Jenny whispered, "This is also strange. People don't just disappear in Millbrook." But as they entered the woods, Sarah couldn't help thinking that maybe people did disappear in Millbrook. They just didn't know about it. The forest was dense and eerily quiet. Old oak and maple trees created a canopy so thick that even in daylight the ground beneath was shrouded in shadows. Sarah and Jenny called David's name every few minutes, their voices echoing strangely among the trees. They'd been searching for about 2 hours when Sarah noticed something glinting in the sunlight near the creek bed. She climbed down the muddy bank and found David Chen's wallet lying open among the fallen leaves. "Jenny, down here!" The librarian scrambled down to join her. Inside the wallet, they found David's driver's license, credit cards, and nearly $300 in cash. But what caught Sarah's attention was a small piece of paper tucked behind the license. On it, someone had written an address in the next town over and a time, 8 p.m. Wednesday. Today was Wednesday. "We should get this to Sheriff Coleman right away," Jenny said. But Sarah was already pocketing the piece of paper. "Of course," she agreed, climbing back up the creek bank. But something told her that giving that address to Mike Coleman would be the wrong thing to do. When they returned to the search command post at the inn, Mike examined the wallet carefully, his face grave. "This doesn't look good. Finding his wallet like this with all the money still in it." He shook his head. "I'm afraid we might be looking at foul play." "Foul play?" Tom Bradley looked shocked. "In Millbrook?" "Mike, that's impossible. I wish it were." "Tom. But the fact is we have a stranger who is asking uncomfortable questions about people in this town, and now he's missing under suspicious circumstances." Sarah watched Mike's performance with growing unease. He seemed genuinely concerned, but David's words kept replaying in her mind. What if Mike Coleman wasn't the hero in this story? What if he was the villain? "I think we should contact the state police," to Dr. Patricia Wells, the town's only physician. "If this really is a criminal matter, we might need more resources." Mike's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Pat. We don't know that a crime has been committed. Could be Mr. Chen just got disoriented, fell into the ravine. These things happen." "But his wallet," Dr. Wells began. "Could have fallen out of his pocket if he slipped and fell," Mike interrupted. "Let's search the ravine area more thoroughly before we start bringing in outside help." The search continued through the afternoon, but no trace of David Chen was found. As evening approached, the volunteers began to drift away, promising to resume the search the next morning. Sarah was one of the last to leave. As she walked to her car, she noticed Mike Coleman talking quietly with Tom Bradley and Principal Watson near the inn's back entrance. The three men looked tense, their voices too low for her to overhear. Instead of driving home, Sarah headed for the next town over. The address from David's wallet led her to a small cafe called the Daily Grind, located on a quiet side street. She arrived at 7:45 p.m. and found a parking spot across the street where she could watch the entrance. At exactly 8 o'clock, a woman in her 50s with short blonde hair entered the cafe. She looked around nervously, then took a seat at a table near the window. Sarah waited a few more minutes, but no one else arrived who might have been David Chen. Taking a deep breath, Sarah crossed the street and entered the cafe. She approached the blonde woman's table hesitantly. "Excuse me, were you supposed to meet David Chen here?" The woman looked up sharply, her eyes wide with alarm. "Who wants to know?" "My name is Sarah Martinez. I'm from Millbrook. David came to my diner yesterday and told me some things. Disturbing things. Now he's missing." The woman studied Sarah's face for a long moment, then gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Sit down. My name is Linda Morrison. I used to work with David at the Bureau." "The Bureau?" "FBI. David didn't tell you?" Linda shook her head. That man never could resist playing things close to the vest. "Yes, we both worked federal investigations until our retirements 3 years ago." Sarah felt her world shift slightly. So he really was a government investigator. One of the best. David has an almost supernatural ability to spot patterns, to see connections that other people miss. Linda's expression was troubled. 6 months ago, he called me about some inconsistencies he'd noticed in financial records from small towns across 3 states. He thought someone was using these communities to launder money for a major criminal organization. And Millbrook was one of these towns? According to David, it was the hub, the center of the entire operation. Linda lowered her voice. He said he'd identified the key players, local officials who were either willing participants or being coerced into cooperation. He was supposed to meet me here tonight with proof. But who's behind it? Who's running this operation? Linda hesitated. David wasn't sure. Someone with connections. Someone who could pressure or corrupt local officials across multiple jurisdictions. Someone with access to large amounts of dirty money that needed to be cleaned. Sarah thought about Tom Bradley's gambling debts, about Principal Watson's financial troubles, about Sheriff Coleman's divorce 2 years ago that had left him strapped for cash. What if they're all being blackmailed? What if someone found out about their vulnerabilities and is using that to control them? That would fit the pattern David identified. Linda checked her watch anxiously. But where is he? David is never late for meetings, especially important ones like this. Sarah's heart sank. I think something's happened to him. We found his wallet in the woods near town. Sheriff Coleman is organizing searches, but you don't trust the sheriff, Linda finished. David specifically mentioned him as one of the corrupt officials, said he was stealing from the jewelry store. Linda was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Sarah, if David is right about Sheriff Coleman, then going to him for help was the worst possible thing you could do. You've essentially told the man in charge of the cover-up that his operation has been exposed. The weight of Sarah's mistake hit her like a physical blow. Oh God, what have I done? More importantly, Linda said grimly, what are we going to do now? Because if David has been silenced, then you might be the only person who knows the truth about what's happening in Millbrook, and that makes you very dangerous to some very dangerous people. As if to emphasize her point, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Sheriff Coleman. Sarah, need to talk to you tonight. Important developments in the Chen case. Can you meet me at the station in an hour? Sarah showed the message to Linda, whose face went pale. Don't go, Linda said urgently. Whatever you do, don't meet him alone. Then what do I do? I can't just hide forever. And what about Emma? What if they go after my daughter to get to me? Linda was already reaching for her phone. I'm calling some old contacts, people who can help. Federal agents who aren't part of whatever corruption David uncovered. She paused, her fingers hovering over the keypad. But Sarah, it's going to take time to get help to Millbrook. Maybe days. Can you stay safe that long? Looking out the cafe window at the darkening streets, Sarah wondered if she had any choice. David Chen had known too much and now he was gone. If she wasn't careful, she might be next. Sarah drove back to Millbrook with her mind racing. Linda Morrison had given her a secure phone number and made her promise to check in every few hours. If I don't hear from you by tomorrow morning, Linda had warned, I'm bringing in federal agents whether we have jurisdiction or not. But first, Sarah had to get Emma to safety. She found her daughter in the kitchen, making a late dinner and humming along to music from her earbuds. Emma looked so normal, so blissfully unaware of the danger that might be closing in around them, that Sarah almost couldn't bring herself to shatter that peace. "Emma, honey, we need to talk." Something in Sarah's tone made Emma pull out her earbuds immediately. "Mom, you're scaring me." "What's wrong?" Sarah sat down at the kitchen table and took her daughter's hands. "I need you to go stay with Aunt Rachel for a few days." "In Denver?" "Mom, what's going on?" "There are some problems in town, some safety concerns. I just think it would be better if you weren't here right now." Emma's eyes narrowed. This was the same expression she'd worn as a stubborn 5-year-old, and Sarah knew she wasn't going to accept vague explanations. This is about that stranger, isn't it? The one who disappeared. And about Sheriff Coleman coming by last night. There was no point in lying. Emma was too smart, and if something happened to Sarah, her daughter needed to know enough to protect herself. The stranger's name was David Chen. He used to work for the FBI, and he came here because he suspected that some people in town were involved in illegal activities. Now he's missing, and I'm worried that asking questions about him might have put us in danger. Emma was quiet for a long moment. "You think Sheriff Coleman is one of the bad guys?" It wasn't a question, and Sarah was struck by how quickly her daughter had grasped the situation. "I don't know what to think anymore. But I do know that I need you somewhere safe while I figure this out. I'm not leaving you alone." "Mom, Emma, no. Dad would never have run away from trouble, and neither will I." Sarah felt a stab of pride mixed with terror. Emma had inherited her father's courage along with his stubborn streak. "Then we both leave. Tonight. We'll drive to Denver together." "And let whoever killed that FBI agent get away with it?" Emma shook her head. "Mom, if you're right about this, then someone in our town is a murderer. Are you really willing to just let that go?" Before Sarah could answer, there was a knock at the front door. Both women froze. Through the kitchen window, Sarah could see the red and blue lights of a police car in her driveway. "Back door," Sarah whispered urgently. "Go to the Hendersons' house and call this number." She pressed Linda Morrison's card into Emma's hand. "Tell her what's happening. What about you?" "I'll be fine. Just go. Now." Emma hesitated for only a second before kissing her mother's cheek and slipping out the back door into the darkness. Sarah watched her daughter's silhouette disappear into the neighbor's yard, then walked to the front door. Sheriff Coleman stood on her porch, but he wasn't alone. Tom Bradley and Principal Watson flanked him, both men looking deeply uncomfortable. "Sarah, thanks for agreeing to meet with us," Mike said as she opened the door. "I didn't agree to meet with anyone." "Well, we really need to talk, and this seemed like the most private place to do it." Mike's smile was still friendly, but his eyes were cold. "May we come in?" Sarah knew she didn't have a choice. All three men were larger than her, and Mike was armed. She stepped aside and let them enter her home. In the living room, the three men arranged themselves strategically, Mike near the front door, Tom by the window, Watson near the hallway that led to the bedrooms. "They were blocking all the exits. Where's Emma?" Mike asked casually. "Track practice," Sarah lied. "At 9 o'clock at night?" Sarah didn't answer. Mike sighed and sat down in her husband's old recliner, a casual gesture that felt like a violation. "Sarah, we have a problem. This David Chen character has caused a lot of trouble for some very important people. People who don't like having their business discussed." "What kind of people?" "The kind who can make problems disappear," Tom said quietly. "The kind who can make people disappear." Sarah looked at the three men she'd known for years, searching their faces for some trace of the good people she'd thought they were. "How did this happen? How did you all get involved in something like this?" Principal Watson spoke first. "It started small. A few years ago, I was having trouble with the school budget, cuts everywhere, programs being canceled. Then someone approached me with an offer. Extra funding for special programs, but I had to process it through certain accounts, ask fewer questions about where the money came from." "And you, Tom?" Tom's face was flushed with shame. "The gambling started after Helen died. I was lonely, depressed. Before I knew it, I owed more money than I could ever repay. They offered to clear my debts in exchange for small favors. Moving church funds through certain accounts, not asking questions about large cash donations." Sarah turned to Mike Coleman. "And you?" "Divorce is expensive, Sarah. Alimony, child support, legal fees. I was drowning financially. When they offered me a way out, I thought it would just be temporary. A few favors. look the other way occasionally, help move some property through evidence without too much paperwork. Who are they? Sarah demanded. The three men exchanged glances. Finally, Mike spoke. We never met the people at the top. We dealt with intermediaries, people who came to town occasionally to check on operations. But we knew it was big, organized crime probably. Money from drugs, human trafficking, who knows what else. And David Chen figured this out. Chen figured out the financial patterns, Watson said. But he was getting close to identifying the real players, the people who could connect our operation to others across 3 states. That couldn't be allowed to happen. Sarah felt sick. You killed him. We didn't have a choice, Tom said desperately. They made it clear that if Chen's investigation continued, we'd all be eliminated. Our families too. So you chose to eliminate him instead. Mike stood up from the recliner. Sarah, we're telling you this because we need you to understand the situation. Chen is gone. His investigation dies with him. But you've been asking questions, and that's a problem. What are you saying? We're saying that there are only 2 ways this can end, Mike said. Either you forget everything David Chen told you and go back to your normal life, or he didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah thought about Emma, hopefully safe at the Hendersons' house by now. She thought about her quiet life, her small diner, her place in this community she'd called home for so long. If I agree to stay quiet, how do I know you won't kill me anyway? How do I know you won't hurt Emma? Because we're not killers, Sarah, Watson said. This thing with Chen, it was self-defense. We had to protect our families. Besides, Mike added, you're part of this community. We've all known each other for years. We don't want to hurt you. Sarah almost believed them. These were men she'd trusted, men who'd been to her husband's funeral, who'd helped her when she needed it. But then she remembered David Chen's intensity, his certainty that corruption in Millbrook ran deeper than anyone suspected. What about the people Chen worked with, his FBI contacts? They'll come looking for him eventually. Chen was retired, Mike said. He was freelancing, working alone. As far as anyone knows, he just decided to disappear. Happens more often than you'd think with guys like that. Tom pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. Sarah, there's something else. A token of good faith. He held out the envelope. $50,000. Consider it compensation for your trouble and for your silence. Sarah stared at the envelope in Tom's hands, her mind reeling. $50,000 was more money than she'd ever seen at one time. It would pay off the diner's mortgage, cover Emma's college expenses, give them the financial security she'd been struggling to provide since her husband's death. But it was also blood money. I need time to think, she said carefully. Mike Coleman's expression hardened. Sarah, this isn't really a negotiation. We need an answer tonight. And if I say no, the silence that followed was answer enough. Sarah reached for the envelope with trembling hands. I understand. The relief on all 3 men's faces was palpable. Tom actually smiled for the first time since they'd entered her house. You're making the right choice, Sarah, Watson said, for everyone involved. Mike stood up and adjusted his gun belt. Just remember, this conversation never happened. David Chen was a disturbed man who disappeared in the woods. That's all anyone needs to know. After they left, Sarah sat alone in her living room, the envelope of money on the coffee table in front of her. She didn't open it. Instead, she picked up her phone and dialed Linda Morrison's number. Sarah, thank God, I've been worried sick. They came to my house. Coleman, Bradley, and Watson. They offered me money to keep quiet. There was a pause. Did you take it? I made them think I did. But Linda, they as much as admitted they killed David. They said they didn't have a choice, that they were protecting their families. Where are you now? Are you safe? Sarah looked out her front window. The police car was gone, but she noticed a sedan parked across the street that hadn't been there before. I think they're watching me, and Emma is at the neighbor's house, but I don't know how long she'll be safe there either. Okay, listen carefully. I've been making calls all evening. I have federal agents en route to Millbrook, but they won't arrive until tomorrow morning. Can you stay hidden until then? Sarah thought about her options. Her house was being watched. The diner would be too obvious. Most of her friends in town were connected to the church, the school, or had relationships with the sheriff's department. There's an old hunting cabin about 10 miles outside town, she said. My husband used to take Emma there when she was little. It's isolated, and I don't think many people remember it exists. Good. Get Emma and get there tonight. Don't go home, don't stop at the diner. Just disappear until help arrives. Sarah ended the call and slipped out her back door. The Hendersons' house was only 2 backyards away, but the journey through the darkness felt like miles. She found Emma hiding in Mrs. Henderson's garden shed. "Mom," Emma whispered, throwing her arms around her. "I was so scared Mrs. Henderson wasn't home and I didn't know what to do." "It's okay, sweetheart. But we need to leave town tonight." They made their way through backyards and side streets, avoiding the main roads where they might be spotted. Sarah's car was parked 2 blocks away at the community center, where she'd left it after a church meeting the week before. The drive to the hunting cabin took them through winding country roads that Sarah knew by heart. She drove without headlights until they were well outside Millbrook's town limits, navigating by moonlight and memory. The cabin was exactly as they'd left it after their last visit 2 years ago. Small and rustic, with no electricity or running water, but it had a wood stove and enough supplies to last for a day or two. Emma helped her mother light the oil lamps and start a fire in the stove. "This feels like camping," she said, trying to inject some normalcy into the situation. "I'm sorry, honey. I'm sorry you got dragged into this." Emma sat down on one of the old cots her father had set up years ago. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you really think those men killed that FBI agent?" Sarah considered lying, protecting her daughter from the harsh truth. But Emma deserved honesty. "Yes, I do." "And they would have killed us too?" "I think so, if they felt they had to." Emma nodded, processing this information with a maturity that broke Sarah's heart. "So what happens now?" "Tomorrow, federal agents will arrive in Millbrook. They'll investigate David Chen's disappearance and hopefully find enough evidence to arrest Coleman, Bradley, and Watson. And then everything goes back to normal?" Sarah realized she hadn't thought that far ahead. How could anything ever be normal again? How could she continue living in a town where she'd discovered such darkness? How could Emma go back to school where the principal had helped cover up a murder? "I don't know," she admitted. They spent the night taking turns keeping watch, though neither of them really slept. Sarah found herself thinking about David Chen, wondering where his body was, whether he'd suffered, whether he'd known what was coming. Around dawn, Emma spotted a car approaching through the trees. "Mom," she whispered urgently. Sarah peered out the window and felt her blood run cold. It was Sheriff Coleman's patrol car followed by Tom Bradley's pickup truck. "How did they find us?" Emma asked. Sarah's mind raced. She'd been so careful, had taken such a roundabout route to the cabin. Then she realized the horrible truth: my phone. They must have tracked my phone. There was nowhere to run. The cabin was surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides and a steep ravine on the 4th. They were trapped. Coleman and Bradley got out of their vehicles and approached the cabin slowly. The sheriff had his gun drawn. "Sarah," he called out, "we know you're in there. We just want to talk." "Like you talked to David Chen," Sarah shouted back. "Sarah, you don't understand the situation. Last night after we left your house, we got a call. The people we work for, they're not happy about this FBI agent situation. They're sending someone to clean up the mess." "What does that mean?" "It means they're coming to eliminate everyone who knows about the operation. That includes us, Sarah. We're all dead unless we can convince them that the problem is contained." Tom Bradley stepped forward. "Sarah, we need that FBI contact information. We need to know who else David Chen was working with. If we can give them that information, maybe they'll let us all live." Sarah felt the trap closing around her. These men weren't just corrupt officials anymore, they were desperate, cornered animals. And desperate people did desperate things. "I don't know anything about his contacts," she lied. "Your phone records say differently," Coleman replied. "We know you made calls last night after we left. We know you met with someone." Sarah realized with growing horror that they'd been tracking her movements, monitoring her communications. The corruption ran deeper than David Chen had suspected. It included access to law enforcement surveillance capabilities. "Sarah," Coleman continued, "I'm going to count to 10. If you don't come out with the information we need, we're going to have to come in, and once we do that, there's no going back." Sarah looked at Emma, who was trying hard not to cry. Her daughter shouldn't have to face this. Whatever happened, Emma needed to survive. 1, Coleman began counting. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. "Emma," Sarah whispered urgently, "remember the cave behind the cabin? The one Dad showed you?" Emma nodded. Her father had discovered a small cave hidden behind a fallen tree about 50 yards from the cabin. It was barely large enough for one person, but it was completely concealed. When I say run, you go there and you hide. No matter what you hear, no matter what happens, you stay hidden until other people come. Federal agents, people who aren't from Millbrook. Mom, I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are. Sarah gripped her daughter's shoulders. Emma, listen to me. Someone needs to survive this to tell the truth about what happened. David Chen died trying to expose the corruption in our town. If we both die, then he died for nothing. 7, Coleman's voice called from outside. Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead. I love you, sweetheart. Your father would be so proud of the woman you're becoming. 8. Run. Emma squeezed through the cabin's back window and disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah watched until she was sure her daughter had made it to the tree line, then turned back to face the front door. 9. Wait, Sarah called out. I'm coming out. She opened the cabin door with her hands raised. Coleman and Bradley both had their weapons drawn now, and she could see the fear in their eyes. These were men who had crossed a line they'd never imagined crossing, and there was no way back. Where's Emma? Coleman demanded. She's not here. I sent her away yesterday. Bradley searched the cabin quickly while Coleman kept his gun trained on Sarah. She's telling the truth. The kid's not here. Sarah, Coleman's voice was almost pleading now. We need that contact information. The people coming to clean this up, they'll torture it out of you if they have to. It'll be easier for everyone if you just tell us now. Sarah thought about Linda Morrison, probably sleeping peacefully in her hotel room, unaware that Sarah's phone had been compromised. She thought about the federal agents who were supposed to arrive in Millbrook in just a few hours. I'll tell you, she said. But first I want to know what happened to David Chen. I want to know exactly how he died. Coleman and Bradley exchanged glances. Why does that matter? Bradley asked. Because if I'm going to die too, I want to understand what this was all about. I want to know why David Chen thought Millbrook was worth dying for. Coleman lowered his weapon slightly. We met him at the old mill Wednesday night. Told him we wanted to make a deal. Give him information in exchange for immunity. He was suspicious, but he came anyway. And Watson was supposed to be there too, but at the last minute he got a call. The people we work for, they'd found out about Chen's investigation. They wanted him eliminated immediately. Bradley picked up the story. We tried to talk Chen into leaving town, disappearing voluntarily. Offered him money, promised to call off the investigation. But he wouldn't listen. Said too many people had died already because of operations like this one. Too many people. Sarah felt a chill. There were others? Chen showed us files, Coleman said quietly. Photos of other investigators who'd gotten too close to this organization. They were all dead, Sarah. Accidents, suicides, disappearances. But Chen had connected the patterns. So you killed him. Tom did it, Bradley said, his voice breaking. I couldn't. I just couldn't. But Tom said if we didn't do it, they'd kill our families. All of us. Sarah looked at Tom Bradley, the man who had comforted her after her husband's funeral, who had helped organize food drives for struggling families, who had taught Sunday school for 15 years. Now he was a murderer. Where is his body? Bottom of the ravine, weighted down. He'll never be found. In the distance, Sarah could hear the sound of vehicles approaching, multiple engines moving fast. For a moment, hope flared in her chest. Maybe the federal agents had arrived early, but Coleman was smiling grimly. That'll be our cleanup crew. They made good time from the city. 3 black SUVs emerged from the forest and pulled up near the cabin. Men in expensive suits got out, and Sarah immediately understood that these weren't federal agents. These were the people who had been pulling the strings in Millbrook for years. The leader was a thin man with silver hair and cold eyes. He surveyed the scene with the detached professionalism of someone who had done this many times before. Sheriff Coleman. Mr. Bradley. I trust you have the situation under control? We have the woman, Coleman said. But there's been a complication. She made contact with someone last night. Another federal agent. The silver-haired man turned his attention to Sarah. Is this true? Sarah realized that her next words would determine not only her own fate, but possibly Emma's as well. If she gave them Linda Morrison's information, more people would die. But if she didn't, they might search harder for Emma. Yes, she said. I called Linda Morrison. She's FBI recently retired. She was David Chen's partner. And where is Ms. Morrison now? Sarah took a gamble. She's already in town. She was supposed to meet me this morning with backup agents. The silver-haired man checked his watch. It's barely dawn. When exactly was this meeting supposed to occur? 8 o'clock. At the diner, one of the other men whispered something in the leader's ear. He nodded and turned back to Sarah. Ms. Martinez, you're going to call Ms. Morrison and tell her that you've discovered new information about Mr. Chen's disappearance. You're going to ask her to meet you at a location of our choosing, and you're going to make sure she comes alone. And if I refuse? The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Then we'll find your daughter and use her to motivate your cooperation. Sarah's blood turned to ice. They knew about Emma. She's not part of this. Everyone is part of this. Miss Martinez, the moment you started asking questions, you made your daughter part of this. From her hiding place in the cave, Emma could hear voices but couldn't make out the words. She'd been crouched in the darkness for what felt like hours, fighting off panic and the urge to run back to help her mother. But then she heard something that made her heart race with hope. The distant sound of helicopters approaching from the south. Federal agents. It had to be. Sarah heard the helicopters too, and she saw the sudden tension in the faces of the men surrounding her. The silver-haired man barked orders into a radio, and his associates began spreading out. Taking defensive positions. Looks like your federal friends arrived early, Coleman said to Sarah. But the silver-haired man was smiling again. Actually, Sheriff, this might work in our favor. Now we can eliminate all the federal interest in Millbrook at once. As the helicopters grew louder, Sarah realized that she had inadvertently led the FBI agents into a trap. Instead of saving Millbrook, she might have just ensured that more people would die. The helicopters passed overhead and landed in a clearing about a quarter-mile away. Sarah could hear vehicles approaching through the forest. Remember, the silver-haired man told Coleman and Bradley, your local law enforcement responding to a disturbance. Ms. Martinez is a hysterical woman who's been spreading conspiracy theories about a tourist who got lost in the woods. You'll handle the situation appropriately. Sarah understood. They were going to use Coleman's authority as sheriff to ambush the federal agents, and she was going to be their cover story. But as the first federal vehicles emerged from the trees, Sarah noticed something that made her smile for the first time in days. There weren't just 3 or 4 agents as she'd expected. There were dozens of them, in multiple vehicles wearing tactical gear and carrying serious weapons. Linda Morrison hadn't just called in a small investigative team. She'd called in an army. The silver-haired man's confidence began to waver as more and more federal agents poured out of the vehicles, quickly surrounding the cabin and establishing a perimeter. A voice boomed through a megaphone. This is FBI Special Agent Patricia Hernandez. You are surrounded. Put down your weapons and surrender immediately. Coleman looked at the silver-haired man desperately. What do we do? For the first time since his arrival, the man in the expensive suit looked uncertain. His small team of enforcers was vastly outnumbered by federal agents who had obviously come prepared for serious resistance. We negotiate, he said finally. But Sarah knew there would be no negotiation. David Chen had died to expose the truth about Millbrook, and now that truth was about to come to light. The stranger who knew too much had gotten the last word after all. In the distance, she could see a small figure emerging from the forest, waving frantically at the federal agents. Emma had finally come out of hiding. The nightmare was over, but Sarah knew that for Millbrook and for her family, nothing would ever be the same again.